Hey friends! Glad to see you on my channel. If you enjoy my content and want to support the channel, there's a PayPal link in the profile description. You can make a small contribution to treat me to a cup of tea. Thank you for your support. Let's get into the video. It was a good day, beautiful weather, and a new story that began in an ordinary hotel, one that would turn the heroine's life completely upside down. Clothes scattered on the floor were the only evidence of a passionate night between two young people. One of them was still sweetly sleeping in the bed. A young, stunningly beautiful girl. It seemed the sunlight coming in from the yard was beginning to wake her too. Though her eyes were still closed, she started shifting in bed. Barely opening one eye, she rubbed her head, which throbbed like she was on a subway train instead of in a bed. Sitting up, she noticed another figure next to her, not immediately recognizing who it was. Realizing it was probably a man, she immediately sat upright, now fully awake. With a hint of panic, she tried to recall what had happened the previous night. That evening, a classmate had invited her to a birthday party, where she accidentally drank juice mixed with alcohol. She had never been able to hold her liquor. Just one look at alcohol and she'd be in a fog. Barely walking down the hallway, she tripped over her own foot and bumped into someone. She couldn't see the person's face clearly at first, only heard a man's voice asking her to be more careful. When she looked up, she saw an unrealistically handsome man standing in front of her. The alcohol hit her hard, and she began talking about his good looks while running her hands over him. Then she reached up and kissed the handsome stranger, right there in the hallway. She didn't remember how they ended up in a hotel room, but she did remember his voice warning her that she was playing with fire. He even asked if she knew what she was doing and whether she was in her right mind. And her response? She pulled him in by his tie for another kiss. The next fragment she remembered was pushing him onto the bed and climbing on top of him. She couldn't stop touching his bare torso, grabbing everything within reach. She even recalled some of the dirty lines, coming from her own mouth. The man had tried to bring her to her senses, at least a little. But how could he? She was overcome with desire, and the alcohol had clouded her mind. She remembered that she got what she wanted. They spent the night together until she passed out. Or rather, she thought she passed out. That was the last memory she had. Reaching for her underwear, she thought it was time to make a quick escape. And right then, the very same man she'd spent the night with appeared at the doorway. She jumped so hard, she fell off the bed with a squeak as she hit the floor. Sitting on the floor for a second, she peeked over the bed to see who the man was. He really was handsome. Though she didn't recognize him, this was Huolikin, the heir to the Hua conglomerate. Climbing back onto the bed, she told him to stay put and not come any closer. Under the blanket, she quickly put on her underwear and the dress she had picked up from the floor. Thankfully, the man wasn't looking. He was focused on writing something down. Once he noticed she was finished getting dressed, he turned to her seriously. He handed her a check, said her skills could use some improvement, but since she had satisfied him, she'd be compensated with money, of course. She didn't even glance at the check, just stared at him in shock. The man misunderstood her look and asked if it meant the amount wasn't enough. The girl reached for her purse. She pulled out a coin, repeated his comment about skills, and added that now her legs and back hurt. He was with her the whole night, after all. Then she dropped the coin on the floor and told him that was his reward. The guy was utterly stunned. His mouth hung open. Meanwhile, the heroine didn't wait around. She slammed the door shut and left the room. Outside, she thought how her first time had turned out so imperfect, and how she'd been mistaken for a cheap girl. Awful. Back in the room, the man admitted that she had definitely caught his attention. As she walked away, she thought about all the time she had lost. She still needed to visit her brother in the hospital. Suddenly, a woman's voice from behind caught her attention. But before she could turn around, someone pushed her into the pool. It was completely unexpected. She looked around to see who had done it. It was her half-sister, Su Qingwan. With a mocking tone, she said her sister was too careless, like she'd fallen into the water herself. Su Qingwan crouched beside the pool and extended a hand in false kindness. The main heroine thought to herself how smug that goat-faced girl looked. First, she pushed her into the pool in front of everyone, and now she was offering her hand? The heroine wasn't having it. She grabbed her sister's hand and pulled her in too. Without much effort, Su Qingwan ended up in the water as well. But the heroine didn't let her surface. Instead, she held her head under. Gasping and struggling, Su Qingwan reached out for help from the onlookers. But Su Jinhuan, the main heroine, just smiled triumphantly. After a few seconds, she pulled her sister up by the hair. The girl was terrified, speechless, coughing uncontrollably. But Su Jinhuan asked how it felt when your lungs ran out of air. But they were interrupted by a guy who asked how Su Qingwan was and told her to get out of the pool already. But Soo Jin-hwan didn't let her do that, pulling her sister back by the hair again. She explained her actions as just a small educational lesson. She asked not to involve her in such childish games again. Otherwise, if something like this happens again, she won't have any pity for Soo Kwing-won. Smiling, the main heroine got out of the water first, triumphantly leaving her sister behind. Soo Kwing-won grimaced and said they'd see who would be pitying who. Despite her state and the not-so-great start to the day, she had to keep moving. Everyone around was paying attention to Jin-hwan. She really was very beautiful. Some even thought she was an actress. But the girl didn't enjoy those compliments. It was cold to walk through the hall while wet, and suddenly someone threw something over her. It was that same guy. He told her to put on the coat if she didn't want everyone staring. He did it just to help. Probably saw what happened when she left the hotel. The girl put on the coat and thanked him, saying she'd return it if they ever met again. The man offered to personally drive her wherever she needed to go. She might have agreed, but it was too awkward after what happened between them. She thanked him again for the coat and was ready to leave. But Huo Li-chin grabbed her by the elbow and pulled her toward him, deciding he wouldn't let her go so easily. He gently traced her lips with his thumb, and Jin-hwan asked what else he wanted from her. Li-kin said her perfume reminded him of their night and made him want more. Soo Jin-hwan explained that it happened while drunk, and as adults, they shouldn't dwell on such things. So she pushed Li-kin away and said she had things to do and was leaving. As a final remark, she added that maybe they shouldn't see each other again. Not even a second later, she was already getting into a taxi while Li-kin just watched. He had already heard her last name, and now Soo Jin-hwan intrigued him even more. Sitting in the car, she gave the driver her destination and thought about how embarrassed she felt. Arriving at the hospital, she needed to pay for something, but the woman at the counter said there weren't enough funds on her card. They offered to let her sort things out and come back later. Soo Jin-hwan immediately went to an ATM to check her account. But there really was no money. Her father hadn't sent any, and it would be terrible if her brother had to stop his medications. Soo Jin-hwan frowned, thinking her family had gone too far, always testing her patience. So she decided to go directly to them and sort things out. A maid at the door explained that her father was currently entertaining guests. She tried to stop the main heroine, but Jin-hwan wouldn't back down, and another woman appeared. It was Madame Soo, Jin-hwan's stepmother. She said with displeasure that her father was busy. The girl stood her ground, saying it was an urgent conversation. The stepmother told her again to wait and not to shame their family by making a scene. Jin-hwan smiled bitterly and asked if her stepmother was going to try and stop her, because she was going in now. Madame Soo raised her hand to strike the girl and began throwing insults at her. The main heroine caught her stepmother's hand and said to try again if she dared. Her father came out of the study and said with irritation that he had guests, then asked why his daughter was causing a scene. Soo Jin-seong asked if she had any respect for him, acting so shamelessly. Jin-hwan asked if he was the one who stopped the foundation payments meant for her brother. The father replied that her brother was her mother's son by another man, and since Soo Jin-hwan had finished school, she could pay on her own. The girl replied that she wanted back what rightfully belonged to her. Behind her father appeared her sister Kwing-won, who, pretending to be the good daughter, said they shouldn't argue while they had guests. The father said the decision had been made. The foundation would pay nothing until she got married. She was an adult now and should manage herself. Soo Jin-hwan wanted to argue again. This was unacceptable. To her, the topic wasn't closed, as it involved her brother's life. There was money in the foundation, and she had a strong will, so she wasn't going to give up that easily. But Soo Kwing-won, stumbling over who knows what, accidentally dropped a tray of hot tea, spilling boiling water right toward Soo Jin-hwan. The main heroine looked at her sister in shock. She knew this cold-hearted girl, but didn't think she'd actually do something like that. And of course, her sister already had a smug smile, having removed the good sister mask for a moment. It was clearly on purpose. Who else could trip like that? Soo Jin-hwan didn't waste the few seconds she had and used her coat to shield most of her body and face. But the hot water still hit her arm. She wasn't fast enough to completely dodge it. Meanwhile, her sister again pretended to be the good daughter, saying it was an accident. From behind the Soo family, a man's voice ordered that something for Burns be brought immediately. Turns out the guests they were all so concerned about had been watching everything. The main heroine, seeing who stepped out of her father's office, recognized both the voice and the man, Huo Li-kin, the one she had spent the night with. He pushed past the rest of the Soo family, walked up to Soo Jin-hwan, and gently took her burned wrist. Then, shooting a displeased glare at Soo Kwing-won and the rest of the family, he repeated that they should stop staring and bring the burn ointment already. From behind the man came her sister's fake crying again as she apologized once more for spilling the tea. The main heroine turned to her father and said he should know full well whether it was an accident or not. Sister Qingwen added that if Su Jinhwan didn't believe her, she could even slap her. She was ready to take it if it would help. The main heroine was already tired of the circus acts her sister kept performing, of the fake tears and empty words. And besides, having a strong character and no love for this brazen fake sister, the girl slapped Su Qingwan without any hesitation, with the same hand that had been burned with boiling water. The stepmother started saying that Su Jinhwan had completely lost her mind, since her daughter had apologized. The father also chimed in, saying it was too much. The main heroine replied nonchalantly that Su Qingwan herself said that she could slap her and even offered her cheek for it. Su Jinhwan turned to her father and said she needed the money. She really didn't want to ruin their relationship, but would take legal action if he refused. Li Qin, observing all this, thought he was proud of this girl. Madame Su, with fake tears in her eyes, said that now his daughter was going to sue them if they didn't give her money. Su Zhenxiong said she was an ungrateful daughter. He would transfer the money this month, but from next month on, she should figure it out herself. The girl took off Li Qin's coat, said she had accidentally stained it and would return it after cleaning it. Then the main heroine went to her room, leaving them all behind. She had achieved her goal. The money would come, so she didn't want to stay with them any longer. Su Zhenxiong carefully asked if Huo Liqin was familiar with his daughter Su Jinhwan. Liqin replied that they were not only familiar but had a very deep relationship. One of the maids brought the ointment, so Liqin took it and went after the main heroine. Su Qingwan was incredibly angry with her stepsister since she had caught Liqin's attention. But that was unacceptable. They had only spent one night together. However, it meant nothing. She had always gotten what she wanted since childhood. She wasn't going to share the man she wanted with Su Jinhwan. The main heroine was calmly entering her room, lost in thought. But suddenly, Huo Liqin appeared beside her. The girl, seeing him again, asked what he still wanted from her and why he followed her here. The man showed her his ointment and said she was at home and he couldn't possibly pose a threat. More precisely, he wouldn't bother her. She said he could give her the ointment and leave, but the man insisted on helping her apply it. He said so himself. And when the main heroine tried to refuse, Liqin pinned her against the wall, completely confusing her. Then the girl boldly asked if no one had ever told him he was too possessive. Huo Liqin's hand gently moved to her waist, pulling her even closer. The man answered her question. He said he could be possessive, but it depended on the person. The girl muttered that it must be her misfortune. Huo Liqin boldly reached for Su Jinhwan's chin, gently tilting it upward, then ran his finger along her lower lip again. Without looking away from her lips, he said that she was actually very lucky. The girl blushed all over, not breaking eye contact. For some reason, even though they barely knew each other, he could easily make her cheeks flush. Then the man suddenly lifted the girl into his arms. She was so stunned she yelled for him to put her down but didn't resist. He carried her into the room and laid her on the bed, leaning over her. Blushing even more, she asked what exactly he was planning to do. Smiling, Huo Liqin asked what she thought of when they ended up on the bed again, just like that night. The main heroine didn't respond, but warned him that if he did anything inappropriate, she wouldn't hold back and would slap him like she did her sister. Her words surprised Liqin. He had already noticed her fiery personality, but never imagined that the sweet, yielding Su Jinhwan from last night would say such things. Touching Su Jinhwan's forearm, he said he was looking forward to the moment when she wouldn't hold back with him. Huo Liqin applied the ointment to her hand and said that if anyone else ever treated her the way they did today, he would punish them, no matter who they were. Glancing secretly at the man, she admitted to herself that when he was this serious and focused, he looked devilishly handsome. She blushed again, remembering she had spent the night with this man, and now he was taking care of her. Meanwhile, her stepsister was peeking through a small crack in the door, watching what was happening inside. The sight didn't please her, as she wanted to become Liqin's wife. The man laid the heroine down on the bed, ran his hand through her hair, then said he had to go because he had a lot of work and she needed rest after the night. While he spoke, Su Jinhwan thought she was tired of him constantly bringing up the night they spent together. But she was happy to hear that Huo Liqin had a lot to do and needed to leave, so she happily said goodbye. It was probably the first time she smiled at him that day. Huo Liqin thought she was simply incredible, funny, sweet, and someone he was lucky to meet. The main heroine exhaled in relief once the man finally left her alone. She hadn't been able to shake him off all day. But it was too early to celebrate. Just outside the door, the man stopped. Out of curiosity, she asked if he needed anything else. Smiling, he told her his name, since he realized she hadn't recognized him. In fact, it seemed like she didn't know him at all. Upon hearing the name, she said aloud that she had heard of such a person before but couldn't remember where or from whom. Trying to recall, she realized the man she had spent the night with wasn't just any guy, but the heir to the Huo conglomerate, Huo Lichen. But she quickly forgot about it because she learned her father had transferred the money to her account. So now she had nothing to worry about. Thank goodness he sent the money. Her younger brother needed medication, and this money was literally saving his life. The next morning, as she was heading to the hospital, her father tried to ask her about her relationship with Huo Lichen. The girl harshly replied that there was no relationship between them and that her father better not even think about using her connection to get close to Lichen. Her father turned pale and said he wasn't thinking that at all. He was just concerned for his daughter. That's why he asked. She muttered that she didn't even think he had words like care or worry in his vocabulary. At the hospital, she was told there was a donor who could help her brother, but the price was high. If she could find the money, they could schedule the surgery for next month. The doctor asked Su Jinhuan to talk to her family as soon as possible. They couldn't wait any longer. Her brother had to be saved while the chance existed. She was allowed to see Yuan, but only from outside the ward. Almost crying, she said she would definitely find the money for the operation, heal her younger brother, and get him back on his feet. She could already imagine a way out of this situation. She remembered her father's words and thought she had a plan. She called Nuan Yi and told her to immediately start looking for a suitable man for her to marry. She decided to do it because her father promised to give her the grandfather's inheritance once she got married. 3 days later, the heroine was already on a date. The man who showed up looked quite handsome. He said his name was Yang Zifeng. Sitting across from Su Jinhuan, he began bombarding her with compliments, saying she looked even better in person than in photos. What's more, she was exactly his type. Yang Zifeng didn't even let her speak, continuing to praise her beauty. Meanwhile, Huo Lichen somehow also ended up at the same cafe. The man said he had an apartment, so the girl wouldn't be left in the cold. But her inheritance was in stocks, so she would have to invest them into his business. Yang Zifeng spoke as if dictating terms. That man kept talking nonstop about everything they could buy with the inheritance money the girl would receive, listing off everything imaginable, thought Su Jinhuan. He also said that his family was traditional, so he didn't want a daughter. Ideally, she should give birth to 2 sons. Huo Lichen, tired of listening to this ridiculous conversation and the man's demands, got up and walked toward them. The girl got angry and said that women are not pigs, that she had heard enough, and that Yang Zifeng was now free to go. Out of the corner of her eye, the girl noticed someone approaching, and when she looked to the side, she recognized Lichen. Now she was curious how much of that nonsense he had overheard and why he was watching them in the first place. She felt embarrassed. She never expected anyone to speak to her so rudely and dictate rules. It was incredibly humiliating. Then the uninvited guest suddenly called her darling and said it was a pleasant coincidence to meet her here. While she was calmly sipping her coffee, he even dared to stroke her head. Shocked, the main heroine spit her coffee straight into the face of the man sitting across from her. She apologized and handed Yang Zifeng a napkin to wipe himself off. The man started asking why someone had come and was calling her darling, and she shouted that she didn't even know that man. Yang Zifeng turned to the other man, wanting to say something to understand what was going on, but immediately froze. He instantly recognized Huo Lichen. After all, many people had heard of him. He stood up, offered him a handshake, introduced himself, and said that he was just getting into business and admired Lichen. But the man not only didn't shake his hand, he didn't even greet him, just looked at Yang Zifeng with clear disapproval. The would-be suitor stood up, moved his chair aside, and offered Huo Lichen his seat. He even called the waiter to bring a cup of coffee for their esteemed guest and said that Su Jinhuan's friends were his friends too. To say the heroine was shocked would be an understatement. She couldn't find words at first. When the man across from her brushed his foot against hers, she thought he was a real pervert. Huo Lichen said that Miss Su liked to joke, but as for their relationship, they were clearly more than just friends. After those words, he once again brushed her calf with his foot, openly flirting. That was the final straw. She jumped to her feet, called him a jerk, and decided she was done here. Yang Zifeng looked at her and said he was serious about her and was ready to go register their marriage right now. The girl heroine put him in his place, saying he already tried to claim her property after one meeting and expected her to birth children like a pig. That's why she didn't even want to see him anymore, let alone marry him. She said he should leave immediately. Yang Zifeng got angry and said that if she thought she could marry him and just take his money, she was wrong. He wouldn't allow it. When he started saying offensive things, claiming she wasn't even that pretty, and that he regretted coming, Su Jinhwan threw her coffee at him and told him to shut up. A real scandal broke out between them. The man was upset at being humiliated. Su Jinhwan stepped away from the table, threw a few more insults his way, and decided she was done staying there. Yang Zifang yelled after her that his suit was very expensive and now she owed him for ruining it. She couldn't just leave. It was disrespectful. But Jinhwan called him mentally unstable and said she wasn't going to pay for anything. He could deal with his problems himself. He was about to chase after her, lunging in her direction, unwilling to be left behind in humiliation, but something stopped him. Someone placed a hand on Yang Zifeng's shoulder, stopping him from moving. It was Huo Lichen, who said that Yang Zifeng must have many lives if he thought he could insult and threaten his woman. The frightened man didn't understand what Lichen was saying or why the girl had brought him to a marriage meeting, but no one was going to answer his questions. Huo Lichen stopped him just to put him in his place and said that if he ever heard even one more insult toward his woman, someone was going to get seriously hurt. Yang Zifeng apologized several times, admitted his mistake, and only then did Lichen let him go, but in a way that made him stumble and fall. After leaving the cafe, the girl immediately called the friend who had set her up with that fiancé and told her he was a complete idiot. Her friend promised to keep looking, but it was hard to find a man who would be willing to marry quickly. They might run into other arrogant guys like this. Even so, the heroine thanked her, saying that if she didn't need to, she wouldn't be doing this. The call ended, and Jinhwan was left alone with her thoughts and the impressions of what had just happened. Turning down a street, she noticed that someone had been following her for quite some time. She started to worry. Maybe it was a thief or something? She would never allow herself to be harmed, so she immediately gripped her purse tightly. Suddenly, she turned to the person following her and swung her arm, ready to defend herself with her bag. But that someone quickly stopped her hand mid-swing, preventing the strike. It turned out to be Huo Lichen, who immediately pinned her to the wall, saying she was being too rough with her future husband. The heroine screamed that he was crazy if he thought it was okay to say all that perverted stuff and stalk her like a shadow. Huo Lichen leaned closer and said that he hadn't slept properly for 3 nights because of her. Su Jinhwan snapped that his insomnia wasn't her problem, but he came even closer and said that it was her fault ever since that night. So now he was demanding compensation. Su Jinhwan, unable to break free, squinted her eyes and started hurling insults at Huo Lichen. Honestly, the man didn't care about her words, but the way her lips moved when she talked and blushed was so attractive that he took her chin and tilted it upward. And then, surprising her completely, he leaned in, closed his eyes, and kissed her. Right there, outside, in full view of everyone. Naturally, she was shocked at first, blushed, and stared blankly ahead. Coming back to her senses, she tried to resist, pushing his chest with the hand he had just released. But it was useless. He caught her hand again and quickly stopped her resistance. She ended up closing her eyes herself, realizing that this wild kiss was driving her crazy. All her thoughts disappeared. She just wanted to keep kissing. At some point, Su Jinhwan realized that this kiss was sweet like honey, dangerous like poison, and she was powerless before it. And even though they were both running out of air, they didn't stop. The kiss was just too pleasant, too sensual, too sweet, a real temptation. A little child passing by pointed at the kissing couple and asked their mom what they were doing. The child's mother blushed and came up with some excuse, saying they should leave the couple alone. The girl overheard the conversation and felt terribly embarrassed, knowing their kiss had been seen. And this guy still wouldn't leave her alone, not giving her the chance to stop this circus. The heroine realized that pushing Huo Lichen away was impossible, so when he leaned in for another kiss, she bit his lip. Luckily, the unexpected bite actually made him let go. It caught him off guard. She wiped her lips with her hand and said he was a real scoundrel and shouldn't think he could do whatever he wanted. Huo Lichen reached for her hand again, intending to pull her into another wild kiss and rid her of all unwanted thoughts. But this time, the heroine slapped his hand away, quickly slipped out of his grip, and again called him a scoundrel as she walked away. The man let her go, muttering to himself that one day Su Jinhwan would remember she belonged only to him. He didn't even get angry about the bite on his lip. Her unique behavior actually made him smile with satisfaction. He promised himself that if this girl had touched him so deeply, he wasn't going to let her go that easily. To pay for her brother's treatment, the heroine also worked at a nightclub. That night, another waitress approached her and explained there was a VIP room with only wealthy guests, heirs of major corporations. The waitress told her that if she served them well, the tips would be generous. The heroine was grateful for her care, Ever since Sister Zia had found out about her sick brother, she had helped in every way she could. Su Jinhwan took the tray with drinks and headed to the room her colleague pointed to. She knocked politely, announcing her presence. It was unlikely anyone heard the knock. There were a lot of people in the room. It was more like a private party, so no one even noticed her. And besides, Su Jinhwan realized it was nearly impossible to stay there. The smell of alcohol and cigarettes was overwhelming. She carefully placed the drinks on the table and decided not to draw attention to herself. It didn't matter if she didn't get a tip. But before she could walk away, someone tried to grope her, sliding a hand under her chest. Her first reaction to such a shameless act was anger and hostility, no matter how rich he was. That's why she immediately elbowed the guy in the chest, hard and with full force. It was a blonde guy who didn't like being resisted. He yelled that she must be new if she dared behave so boldly. Su Jinhwan didn't want to cause a scene at work, so she bowed slightly and said it was just a misunderstanding and apologized. A girl quickly approached the blonde and asked if the waitress even knew who Zhou Xiao really was. The voice sounded familiar to the heroine. Of course, it was her stepsister, Qingwan, smirking and asking if the waitress really thought an apology was enough. Su Jinhwan wasn't pleased to see her stepsister, knowing she would likely try to humiliate her. She didn't want trouble. What good would come from dealing with spoiled rich kids? So the heroine respectfully asked the blonde man what she could do for him. Zhou Xiao now felt much more confident. Tilting his head with a mocking grin, he asked himself what he really wanted from the waitress. He pulled out his wallet, tossed a few bills in the air, and said he had accidentally dropped some money that she needed to pick up. If she refused to serve her customer, then she wasn't getting out of there. Su Qingwan added another condition. She had to pick up the money like a dog, using only her mouth. She pulled out her phone and began recording, saying it would be a perfect boomerang. She planned to show it to Huolikin to humiliate the heroine. Su Jinhwan realized that if she acted recklessly, she really might not get out of there unscathed. While everyone relaxed, expecting her to obey and crawl on the floor, she lunged at her stepsister and snatched the phone from her hands. She also grabbed a liquor bottle from the table and declared that if anyone came near her, she'd call the police immediately. She smashed the bottle to turn it into a makeshift weapon. Su Jinhwan thought it ironic. Su Qingwan, with her phone, reminded her that in such situations, it's best to start threatening with the law. Pointing the sharp glass at them, she warned that one wrong move and she'd use it without hesitation. If anyone thought she was bluffing, they were welcome to try, but the consequences would be dire. She wasn't afraid of. In truth, she wouldn't hurt anyone. But her eyes gave nothing away. They were steady and full of conviction. Su Qingwan told everyone the waitress was bluffing, and they should rush her and beat her until she couldn't walk. Su Jinhwan said that if Su Qingwan really believed that, then she should be the first to try and see what happened. The blonde guy turned to Su Qingwan and said that since she was yelling the most, she should go get her phone back herself. Of course, the girl didn't want to do it. Then Zhou Xiao shoved her toward the waitress and called her a loose woman who was good only at talking. Turning his back to Su Qingwan, he called her useless if she couldn't retrieve her own phone, and even flipped her off. The heroine knew it was probably very humiliating for Su Qingwan, but she deserved it for all her big tail. Zhou Xiao and the other guests decided to leave, not daring to confront the waitress. Only Su Qingwan remained, who wasn't welcome until she took her phone and left. By the way, Zhou Xiao had shoved her so hard she fell to the floor and stared down in defeat until Su Jinhwan finally addressed her. The girl told her to take her phone and get out immediately. Su Qingwan did so, but before leaving, she vowed she would get revenge for this humiliation. When the door slammed shut, only the waitress remained in the room. Unable to stay on her feet any longer, she collapsed onto a couch behind her, breathing heavily. Only now did she realize how terrified she had actually been the entire time. If something had gone wrong, she probably couldn't have done anything. Their strength was in numbers. Had she escalated the situation, things could have ended very badly. But luckily, they just left. Still, she knew she'd have to report this to Sister Sia. Losing VIP guests wasn't good for the business. She became alert again when she heard a rustle. It would be bad if someone was still here. She didn't want to deal with more drama. To her surprise, it was Huolikin. Sure, he wasn't ideal company, but it was still better than those others. So Su Jinhwan wasn't immediately alarmed. She was more surprised than anything to see this man here. She quickly stood up from the couch, wondering why every time she ended up in a pitiful situation, it was always this man who appeared. Before she could say anything, Huolikin stepped close, probably to pull one of his usual pervy moves again. Instinctively, she wanted to step back, but there was only the couch behind her, so she fell onto it. The man leaned over her and stayed silent for a few seconds, just staring. The girl felt awkward and asked what he wanted this time. He told her not to move so he could check if she was okay, though it was odd of him to do so, since no one had hit her. Still, Su Jinhwan didn't move while he gently ran his hands over her face. Then he asked why she worked in such a dangerous place. The girl brushed off Huoliken's hand and said that if she had enough money, she would never have come to a place like this. When she mentioned money, the man asked why she didn't want to take his money, especially since he was the one offering to see her more often. The girl snapped back that she wasn't the kind of girl who could be bought. And of course, the man understood that. With her character, she wouldn't do something like that. But still, there was a but. His but was that maybe this was the only way he could win this girl's attention. So he decided to try and make a deal with her, one that would benefit them both. Without stating the terms outright, he smiled and asked how much money she wanted to spend a month with him. Su Jinhwan furrowed her brows and asked if he was implying he wanted to buy her like a toy. Huoliken explained that she needed him and he needed her. The idea was that he'd help her financially and she'd help him physically. He wanted to be with her for a month, hoping that would be enough time to get over his emotional dependence. But Su Jinhwan asked if rich people really believed everything could be solved with money. Li Ken frowned too and said that if such a possibility existed, why not use it? He was rich and could afford almost anything. That angered the heroine. Not wanting to hear any more nonsense from such an idiot, she slapped him. After the slap, he went quiet. For several seconds, he didn't say a word, just stared at Su Jinhwan with a flash of fury in his eyes. Of course, she had no doubt he deserved it. But that look, it was frightening. She'd never seen or felt anything like it from him before. She immediately told him she wouldn't apologize for that slap. And honestly, she thought it wasn't even enough for someone so shameless. He reached out and, out of habit, raised her chin with his fingers, forcing her to look him in the eye. But this time, there was no tenderness in his tone or gaze. Instead, Huolichen asked if she was tired of living. He didn't like being disrespected, and while he admitted to himself she looked incredibly attractive when angry, he still told her to get out. He turned his back on the waitress, telling her to get out of the room in a tone so firm that it genuinely scared her. Once outside, she thought he was furious because he'd never been treated like that. But she also admitted she'd lost her temper a bit after hearing his words. But who forced him to say such crap? And why should she stay silent? In fact, she thought the slap should have been harder. So she decided not to waste any more thought on this arrogant bastard and to focus on why she came here in the first place. A bit later, while wiping a bottle, the heroine overheard her coworkers talking about some man. She wasn't a fan of gossip, but after catching a few bits of their conversation, she couldn't help but ask who they were talking about. It turned out the girls were discussing Mr. Huo, who had asked his manager to bring him a dozen beautiful girls to help him relax. At first, she didn't realize which Mr. Huo they meant, but the girls clarified. It was Huo Lichen, their esteemed guest. One of them joked that Su Jinhwan must be upset she hadn't been chosen, and teased her about it. But the heroine seriously replied that he was the worst man of them all. Her coworkers didn't understand her attitude. After all, they thought she didn't even know Huo Lichen, and yet she said such things. Instead of explaining, Su Jinhwan returned to her duties, thinking about what a disgusting man he was. As she was thinking about how all men are pigs, she suddenly noticed something strange. From a distance, she clearly saw the figure of her sister, who was leading some guy by the arm toward a hotel room. Looking more closely at the guy with Su Qingwan, the girl thought she definitely recognized him. She just couldn't remember exactly where she'd seen him, but she was certain she had. Meanwhile, Su Qingwan had dragged the guy into a room, laid him on the bed, and noted to herself how damn heavy he was after drinking. The young man thought he was still at the party, asking for more booze and mumbling weird things. Taking advantage of his unconscious state, she took his wallet, muttering that she needed to check something. She pulled out his ID card, thinking that even if he had no real status, he could still be useful. She was looking for people she could use in her future shady schemes, and this guy seemed perfect. Suddenly, she noticed a slip of paper fall out. It looked important. Picking it up, Su Qingwen read it and realized that the man was a donor. And for the same hospital where Su Jinhwan's brother was staying, she put the pieces together. Her sister worked night shifts here, her brother needed a donor, and this guy was one. She decided to investigate further later. For now, she tossed the wallet and document onto the floor. At the moment, she had a different plan for this guy, and smiled as she moved into action. She climbed onto the bed next to him, either to actually spend the night with him or at least make it look like she had. Meanwhile, Jinhwan returned with an empty tray, exhaling heavily. She admitted to herself she was tired, but for her brother, she'd keep working hard. Just as she thought that, a coworker approached with a list of tasks Soo Jin-hwan needed to complete. The girl took the paper and quickly scanned it, but something on it made her pause. According to the list, she had to meet with Ho Lee-kin again today. Something needed to be delivered to him. She had really hoped to stay away from him, but no. Circumstances kept throwing her into contact with that man. She even decided to ask the manager if someone else could deliver it instead, explaining that she was very tired. But the manager said that the man was expecting her specifically, and since he was an important guest, they had to please him, so Soo Jin-hwan could rest only after completing this task. The heroine crumpled the paper slightly in her hands and tried to calm herself, telling herself it wasn't such a big deal and she just needed to focus on the money. She quickly replaced her uncertain thoughts with determination, reminding herself she just had to do her job, for her brother's sake. Walking past one of the rooms, she kept telling herself that Ho Lee-kin wasn't that scary, and she was so deep in thought that she didn't notice the open door. Because of her own carelessness, someone suddenly grabbed her by the arm and yanked her into the room. She hadn't even recovered yet, but immediately began to ask what was going on and who the person was. The person responded to her protests with a slap, so hard it made her stagger backward. Then the strong hands of the man pushed her to the floor as he hurled insults at her, humiliating her. It was none other than Zhou Xiao, the guy from the party where the earlier conflict had occurred. Smirking wickedly, he said that now the waitress would learn her place. He approached quickly and Soo Jin-hwan began to scream for help as she couldn't get up or escape in time. Zhou Xiao shouted even louder, telling her to shut up, and then leaned down and grabbed her by the hair. Pulling her toward him, Zhou Xiao said he hadn't forgotten how she humiliated him at the party, and now was the time for revenge. The girl glared at him angrily and screamed again, telling him to stop and not to touch her. Zhou Xiao didn't expect her to elbow him in the chest again, just like at the party, so he let go for a second. Soo Jin-hwan tried to crawl forward to get up, but his hand reached out for her again. With one movement, he threw her onto her back and shouted that she should be grateful for his attention. Not wanting to become a victim, Soo Jin-hwan looked around for something. Nearby lay an ashtray. Her eyes locked onto it, and before he could approach again, she grabbed the object. Zhou Xiao was enraged that a girl had rejected him, and he intended to punish her for it. As he got too close, Soo Jin-hwan hit him on the head with the ashtray. The blow stunned the blonde man, making him lose focus, and the girl managed to slip away. But even though he was injured, Zhou Xiao managed to grab her by the calf and pull her back. Because of that, Soo Jin-hwan fell again, and seeing his face, she realized he was now even more dangerous. Smiling maniacally, he loomed over her and said he wouldn't let her leave the room no matter what. Her mind quickly came up with a solution, to knee him in the groin, and that worked better than anything. It was like he got struck by lightning and fell back. Soo Jin-hwan had put so much force into the kick that now Zhou Xiao lay on the ground, clutching himself in pain and groaning. The heroine yelled that she had warned him to let her go and called him an arrogant jerk who thought money could solve everything. Approaching him, she kicked him in the same place again, insulting him verbally too. When he begged her to stop, she remembered how she had begged him too, and he ignored her. So, for a good minute, she kept stomping on him with her heel. What finally stopped her was the sound of approaching footsteps. She needed to get out. But she didn't have time to escape before a few men entered the room and started chasing her. Soo Jin-hwan realized she couldn't keep running forever. She had to hide so they would look elsewhere. And unsurprisingly, the first person she ran into during this crazy moment was Ho Lee-kin. He suddenly grabbed her by the waist and pulled her to him. And just like that, the girl found herself in Ho Lee-kin's arms again, despite the fact he had recently been angry with her and told her to leave. Without a second's hesitation, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, pulling her into a soft kiss. In truth, she didn't want to respond to the kiss, especially because this was neither the time nor the place. She was about to insult him when he warned her not to move or he'd turn her in himself. That was incredibly low. Soo Jin-hwan thought it was unacceptable to exploit her distress for his pleasure. Soon the men arrived, but Ho Lee-kin used his body to fully shield Soo Jin-hwan. When he heard their voices, he turned his head and practically growled at them to get out. The men immediately apologized and left the room, saying they didn't mean to disturb Mr. Lee-kin and were just looking for someone. The heroine heard the entire exchange, and when the man didn't let her go after a minute, she said it herself. Then he finally let her go and said he at least deserved a thank you for saving her. Jin-hwan got upset and said that all rich people think money solves everything, so they allow themselves to trample others. She was honestly exhausted by the situation. It had drained her so much that she began to cry right in front of Lee-kin. The man was surprised to see how upset Soo Jin-hwan was. You could say that the usually cold Huo Liqin was shocked and worried by the heroine's tears. After that, he completely let go of Su Jinhwan, giving her the chance to finally leave the room. The heroine had always tried to stay confident, strong, and independent, but such events had broken her down. And today, she finally lost it and cried. Those men still hadn't managed to find Su Jinhwan, so they went to the manager, threatening that they wouldn't let this go. The manager couldn't believe that their sweet Su Jinhwan had hit someone, but one of the men threatened to shut the place down if she wasn't handed over. That truly scared the manager, so he ordered the staff to find the girl. The girl was in the restroom. She had calmed down and was thinking about how her tears had frightened the stern Huo Liqin. But she didn't like the fact that she felt vulnerable around him. As she was touching up her lipstick, a few girls entered, complaining that Liqin hadn't even looked at them. Su Jinhwan admitted to herself that the girls were very pretty. It was strange that the man hadn't even glanced their way. At first, she even thought maybe he rejected them because of her, but the thought startled her. She reminded herself again that Huo Liqin was a heartless man, and it was forbidden for her to think anything romantic about him. In her mind, she cursed him at least 10 more times and promised herself that it would never happen again. And to prove to herself how much she disliked him, she turned to the girls and said it was really strange that Huo Liqin had ignored so many pretty women. Then she added a juicy rumor that the issue wasn't self-control, but impotence. You had to see the shocked faces of those 3 girls. Their mouths dropped open. Proud of her made-up story, the heroine told them to carry on and walked out. And the first person she saw after exiting the restroom was Huo Liqin, staring at her intently. Frightened, Su Jinhwan hoped he hadn't heard that conversation. So she decided to act normal and told him she needed to pass through to get back to work. But as soon as she took a step, the man grabbed her chin and turned her face toward him. Smiling, he asked if she really thought he had performance issues. Su Jinhwan forced a smile and said a man so handsome and elegant like him, how could he be impotent? Huo Liqin actually found it a bit amusing how quickly and cleverly she tried to cover up. Nearby, she heard the anxious voices of her coworkers and realized they were looking for her. The man understood that too, so he pulled her closer and embraced her. Although Su Jinhwan was embarrassed, she was already preparing to voice another complaint. The man explained that he didn't want anyone to hurt her, so it was best if she didn't move. They might not be noticed. And the girl didn't resist. She just peeked out from behind him to see how many security guards there were. What worried her most was that they weren't Zhou Xiao's men. They were employees of their own establishment. She said this aloud, and when Liqin saw her concern, he told her to follow him. But they didn't get far because the manager appeared, surprised to see them together. The manager offered to find another girl for Huo Liqin, explaining that Su Jinhwan was one of their waitresses who had gotten into trouble. Huo Liqin, activating his assertive side, said he had every right to choose any girl he wanted. Su Jinhwan didn't hear what the manager replied, but she realized he was planning to turn her in, since the situation was serious. So she spoke up herself, explaining that it was self-defense and she hadn't done anything wrong. Just then, other waitresses arrived. The girls immediately defended Su Jinhwan, saying Zhou Xiao was a scumbag who always got handsy. The heroine asked if the manager had heard his staff's words and concluded that the man was a complete bastard. In unison, the girls said it would be a human rights violation if they handed Su Jinhwan over to Zhou Xiao. Huo Liqin had been silently watching the whole protest with his hands in his pockets. And in his eyes, the heroine shone. He admired how she refused to be a victim and always found a way out, even from the worst situations. Seeing such a strong girl made him want to help her again. The manager explained that if they didn't hand Su Jinhwan over, the nightclub would be shut down and everyone would lose their jobs. The girl understood that refusing to hand her over would indeed result in losses, not just for the manager. She didn't want the club to take that kind of risk for her either. There were many good people here who needed jobs too. That's when Huo Liqin stepped in and said the manager feared that family as if they were the center of the universe. And to resolve the issue, he had just bought the club's majority share. Now he was the main shareholder, and if Zhou Xiao wanted to take someone, he'd have to come in person. All the waitresses were thrilled by how nobly the man had acted. Now their Su Jinhwan was free. Even the girl was surprised. Had he really done this just for her? But she didn't want to think that way, so she chalked it up to him doing it for good PR, but admitted that he had finally used his wealth properly. Turning back to Su Jinhwan, he said that if Zhou Xiao had any questions, he could come and ask him personally. After that, the man left them. The waitresses rejoiced that they wouldn't have to tolerate Zhou Xiao's insolence anymore, and the manager told everyone to return to work. But Su Jinhwan suddenly jumped up and ran after Liqin. The manager asked where she was going, but the girl didn't explain. She just said it wouldn't take long. As it turned out, she ran to the parking lot straight after the man. Hualikin had already opened the door of his car and was about to get inside. But the heroine wasn't about to let him leave just like that, so she called out his name. That caught his attention, and he turned his head toward her, silently asking with his eyes why she was there. And then she did it. She thanked him for helping them. Her words brought a smile to his face. Su Jinhwan, though stubborn and strong-willed, knew how to be grateful. She understood that if he hadn't stepped in this time, she would have been in serious trouble. She didn't care anymore about his reasons for doing it. She was simply thankful for the gesture. Hualikin's assistant had seen the whole scene and immediately admitted that the waitress was truly a beauty. Pulling out some documents, he handed them to Likin and informed him that tomorrow's meeting had been postponed due to a visit from a certain young lady. But the man replied that the meeting was too important to be postponed. They both knew that his mother had arranged the postponement in order to introduce Likin to a potential bride. The assistant tried to explain that it couldn't be put off forever. He was trying to persuade the young master because he was tired of constantly dealing with conflicts between him and his mother. The assistant said that Likin wasn't getting any younger, and his mother simply wanted to ensure the family line would continue. But the man snapped back, saying he wasn't a horse that needed to continue the bloodline. The driver thought he'd better not have opened his mouth at all. He'd clearly angered the young master. But the man spoke again. He asked Xiaoshen to gather information about Su Jinhwan. The next morning, one of the club's guests from the previous night woke up in one of the rooms. He didn't wake up on his own. He heard strange sounds nearby. Turning his head, he flinched when he saw a girl sitting beside him, crying. Su Qingwan had staged a scene, pretending they had spent the night together, and that it was her first time. She said her traditional parents would kill her if they found out. The young man was a little confused. This was a strange situation, but the girl was very pretty. Since she was crying, he took her hand and said that whatever had happened was his fault. He introduced himself as Huo Xiaochuan, the eldest son of the Ho family, and offered to speak to her father himself. Su Qingwan protested, saying no one could find out, and Huo Xiaochuan was impressed that she didn't care about his status. Instead, she said that if he wanted to take responsibility, they should start with a romantic relationship. Su Qingwan was such a skilled liar that she easily squeezed out tears and manipulated the man. Meanwhile, Su Jinhwan was catching up on sleep after her night shift when her stepmother woke her. She reluctantly got up and told Madame Su that people who wake others early get struck by lightning. Madame Su replied that she hadn't been struck yet, and Su Jinhwan better take care of herself, then handed her some papers. Sleepy-eyed, Su Jinhwan took the papers and glanced through them, not quite understanding what they were yet. But the bold heading on the first page made her realize that she hadn't escaped yesterday's trouble with Zhou Xiao. Not wanting to hear Madame Su's smug comments, she simply slammed the door in her face. Over her stepmother's yelling, she read a legal letter from Mr. Zhou, claiming that due to the injuries she caused, he had become impotent. Su Jinhwan was surprised Zhou Xiao was so fragile that he could end up impotent. Smiling, she said that if he intended to slander her, she wouldn't go down without a fight. The heroine called Nuan Yu and said she was in legal trouble and needed help. Zhou Xiao was furious that he had been locked up in the hospital because of some insolent waitress. He lay in frustration, drinking alcohol and cursing everyone for the fact that instead of getting lucky, he'd gotten hurt. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, and soon Su Jinhwan entered the room. She, putting on her most innocent face, asked if she had the right room, Zhou Xiao's. Su Jinhwan said she hadn't meant to hurt Mr. Zhou and was very sorry. Zhou Xiao replied that now she needed to make it up to him properly. But Su Jinhwan continued to act all sweet and innocent, provoking him. And it worked. Zhou Xiao smiled perversely, unable to resist her. When his body reacted to her teasing, Su Jinhwan stepped back. She shouted that Zhou Xiao was a liar. He wasn't impotent. The man admitted it was true and said that soon she'd be the one to test him again. Su Jinhwan raised her hand at the man when he said that if she satisfied him, he'd drop the charges. But Zhou Xiao grabbed her hand and said there was no point in resisting. He said he had the best lawyers, so lying wouldn't cost him anything. Su Jinhwan smiled and said that his confession was more than enough for her. Zhou Xiao froze, asking what she meant by that. And then, bam, a vase smashed over his head. Nuan Yu shouted for the heroine to get out of there. The two of them ran out of the hospital room. It turned out that Nuan Yu had recorded their entire conversation on video. Su Jinhwan had staged the whole scene just to expose the vile Zhou Xiao. And now they had proof of his lies. Zhou Xiao, meanwhile, started screaming for someone to go after the two girls and help him with his injury. When a man appeared in front of him, Zhou Xiao thought it was security and ordered him to catch Su Jinhwan. But as soon as he looked up and saw who it was, Zhou Xiao turned pale. It wasn't a guard, it was Huo Lichen, and he looked furious. Zhou Xiao dropped to his knees, staring at the man, wondering what he was doing there. But before he could make sense of it, Li Ken kicked him hard in the chest. Then the man said that the girl Zhou Xiao had harassed was under his protection. With tears in his eyes, the blonde began to defend himself, saying she had come to him on her own. But Huo Lichen wasn't listening. He called him pathetic and kicked him in the chest again. Then he told the guards that since Zhou Xiao had claimed to be impotent, now they might as well make it true. Huo Lichen walked out of the room while the two guards leaned over Zhou Xiao, telling him to relax. The blonde trembled and sobbed, begging them not to touch him, but no one was listening. Later, the man's manager reported that his mother had already found out about the investment in the club. And now she was investigating it, meaning she would soon find out about Su Jinhuan. Li Ken said nothing. He was used to his mother meddling in his affairs. As he exited the hospital, his eyes caught Su Jinhuan standing up ahead. He stared for so long that she felt his gaze and turned around. She was surprised to see Huo Lichen again. Fate really was a twisted thing. But this time, the man didn't even greet her. He just ignored her. Su Jinhuan hadn't expected that. Total coldness, even though she had begun to believe he wasn't so bad after all. Her friend noticed she looked down and asked if everything was okay. Su Jinhuan said everything was fine. And deep down, she told herself that man had only been looking for a thrill. They lived in different worlds, and there was no point dwelling on it. So she told her friend to quickly arrange another date. Her brother's condition was getting worse. After some time, Su Jinhuan met another candidate to be her husband. And this time, it seemed she was lucky. The man was kind and appeared reliable. At one point, the man asked if everything was all right. He felt like she wasn't interested in him at all. He said if he'd made any mistakes, she could just tell him. He'd fix it right away. The girl replied that she thought he was a good man and she had no conditions, only that they get married as soon as possible. The man sipped his tea and asked why they needed to rush. Su Jinhuan looked down and admitted that she needed to marry quickly to get her inheritance. Her brother was sick and needed money. Surprisingly, the man wasn't angry that the marriage was fake. He even said it was touching. And he agreed to the condition. He even promised that one day he would throw her a grand wedding because she deserved it. It all sounded so sweet. The man was very kind, but Su Jinhuan still felt uneasy. She knew why she was feeling down, so she decided not to delay things and proposed going to register the marriage immediately. The man was a little surprised. He knew they were in a hurry, but he hadn't expected this much urgency. The heroine said that saving a life was like putting out a fire. It was urgent, so there was no time to waste. Just then, behind her, she heard an angry woman shouting insults. When Su Jinhuan looked at her, the woman yelled that she had no right to take her man. The girl went pale from what she heard. Everything had been going so well. The man asked the woman what she was doing there since they had broken up long ago, but she only shouted louder. The woman beat on his chest, yelling that he was a terrible person for leaving her with a child. The man tried to explain to Su Jinhuan that he didn't understand what was going on, but the woman's yelling drowned him out. The main heroine said she saw everything herself, so no explanations were needed. The man turned pale because he really didn't understand what was happening. The woman clung to his hand like a leech and said that Su Jinhuan had no right to destroy a family. People around them had already started gathering and whispering because the woman was shouting so loudly. Su Jinhuan crossed her arms over her chest and said these accusations were pointless. She said she had only met this man today and didn't know anything about him, so there was no reason to insult her. Before leaving, she told the man to take care of his wife and not go on dates. He wanted to run after Su Jinhuan, but the woman held on to him so tightly she didn't let him. When the main heroine had already left the place, the woman suddenly calmed down. She settled into the seat of her ex-husband and began eating his dessert. The man asked for an explanation about what Yu Lingli was even doing here and why she had slandered him. The woman replied that she was here only to ruin everything. This angered the man, and he asked what her motives were at all. Why had she lied and ruined the date? The woman said he didn't deserve anything good and accused him of beating women. The man told her she was just a terrible person, the worst thing that had ever happened to him. From afar, the manager Xiaoshen was watching all this. He swore he hadn't told Yu Lingli to humiliate Su Jinhuan, only to ruin the date. Ho Liken was angry that everything went wrong and the main heroine was insulted instead of just having the date canceled. Su Jinhuan was very upset. She didn't understand why all her dates ended like this. After all, she needed to take care of her brother. She was forced to inherit, but all the men around seemed to have vanished. The noise ahead snapped her out of her thoughts. Ahead stood a whole crowd of people, saying someone was only pretending. The girl decided to see what was happening there. It turned out there was a woman lying unconscious on the ground. Su Jinhwan didn't waste time asking questions and immediately bent down to the woman. She shouted to the people that the woman was in shock and was not pretending. Su Jinhwan shouted for everyone to disperse and for someone to call an ambulance. She herself took responsibility to perform chest compressions and artificial respiration. No one from the crowd called the ambulance, so Huolikin's assistant did it. The young man, like the whole crowd, was amazed that such a beautiful girl had first aid skills. The assistant was also impressed by how Su Jinhwan surprised Huolikin. After some time, fortunately, she managed to restore the woman's pulse. She was already tired when the ambulance finally arrived. The paramedic said that luckily the woman had come out of shock thanks to the girl. The girl calmed down a little when she heard the woman was feeling better, then stepped back not to interfere. From the stress, she became dizzy and Su Jinhwan lost her balance. Fortunately, Huolikin approached in time and caught the girl before she fell. The man hugged her and asked her not to say anything but just relax. He said he would take her to the hospital just in case. And this made the main heroine feel something new in her chest. Could it be that this man cared about her? She didn't know, but she felt good in his arms. When the man noticed she was tense, he asked if she was intending to resist. The girl said no. She was just uneasy about why he had ignored her before but was now caring. It was hard for the girl to understand because her mind was clouded and her eyelids grew heavier and heavier. Eventually, she fainted in Huolikin's arms and the man carried her to the car. Actually, he himself didn't understand why this girl stirred such feelings in him, but he decided that it didn't really matter. Touching the girl's cheek, he couldn't understand how she could sleep so calmly. The girl came to her senses only after a long time in the hospital. She had really rested well while lying in the hospital. It turned out Huolikin even paid her bill, and it wasn't small. At the end, the girl was given a list of medications and procedures to help her feel better. Now she felt indebted to Huolikin. She didn't like that. Suddenly, the doctor treating her brother called the main heroine, and the terrible happened. The man who was supposed to be the donor refused to do it. The girl began saying that if the problem was money, then it wasn't a problem at all. But the doctor said that donation was a voluntary act, so they couldn't force the person. Su Jinhwan burst into bitter tears and, more out of despair, started saying that everything was going so well, and then, bam! It all fell apart. Her brother wouldn't be able to hold on much longer and his condition would worsen. She said the doctor had to give her the donor's number. She would fall to her knees, do anything they said just to save her brother. But doctors were forbidden from violating medical ethics. He couldn't give the girl the contact information of that person, not for any money. The main character immediately apologized, knowing the doctor couldn't have done that. She explained she just reacted emotionally. When the conversation ended, Su Jinhwan, still with tears in her eyes, was walking down the street asking God why he first gave her hope, and then took it away. The girl admitted that she really didn't know what to do now. How could she help her brother when there was no donor? On her way, she ran into her sister, who was flirting with some guy. Not the best meeting, but she had already noticed that today was not her lucky day. But it was unpleasant to watch her fake, kind sister. The girl just couldn't understand how someone could be such an empty-headed goat. After the car drove off, Su Qingwan turned her attention to her sister and gave her a triumphant look. But Su Jinhwan didn't want to waste her energy or nerves on someone like her sister, so she silently and indifferently walked past her. But Su Qingwan suddenly turned to the girl, who was walking away, and asked why she looked so upset. Then she laughed and said that her dear sister's mood must be because her beloved little brother was already halfway into the grave. The main character reacted sharply to those words, turning her head toward her sister and asking what she had just said. She furrowed her brows and asked if her dear sister was just talking nonsense or if she actually knew something about her brother's condition. Su Qingwan said that of course she knew, how the worthless kid first got a donor and then, boom, it all fell apart. The half-sister said she was the one who arranged it so the donor would back out. That was her surprise. Revenge on Su Jinhwan. As soon as she finished speaking, the girl grabbed that hateful chicken by the throat. Su Qingwan started choking and begged to be let go. And Su Jinhwan, driven by emotion, really did grip tightly. She started demanding to know whether Su Qingwan was really involved in this, and what exactly she had done. Su Qingwan said she wouldn't explain anything, and her sister better let go immediately, because her word alone could decide her brother's fate. In response, Su Jinhwan squeezed harder and shouted that if something was wrong, Su Qingwan should take it up with her, not touch her sick brother. When Su Qingwan finally started begging to breathe and promised to tell everything, the main character actually let her go. Not a second passed before her devious sister started shouting for their parents, complaining that Soo Jin-hwan was hurting her. Taking advantage of the distraction, Soo Kyung-won dashed toward the house entrance. Once inside, she shouted that she wasn't afraid of her dear sister. Her advantage was that their parents were here. So if Soo Jin-hwan wanted a fight, let her show what she was capable of. Soo Jin-hwan replied that if her sister dared behave this way, she should know she wouldn't leave the house in peace. She wouldn't leave her alone. And so it happened. Soo Jin-hwan wasn't bluffing. She followed her sister everywhere, no matter where or when. Soo Kyung-won told her to back off and even regretted saying the donor issue was her doing. She now thought her stepsister was a psycho who wouldn't leave her alone. But really, how could anyone call her a psycho? This was a person's life. The main character would never give up. Soo Kyung-won said she was going on a cruise party, so she was curious to see how Soo Jin-hwan would manage to get in there. The girl wasn't allowed in if It was a private party, and entrance without an invitation was forbidden. She looked firmly at the guards. If Soo Kyung-won was going to be so clever, then she would just wait here as long as it took. Suddenly, a familiar voice sounded from behind. It turned out to be the assistant of that Hwolikin. He asked if Miss Soo had also come to the party. The girl turned to face the man and said she'd love to come in, but she didn't have an invitation. The man explained that this yacht belonged to their senior, not Hwolikin. So if she wanted to, they could go inside together. The main character happily thanked Assistant Shen for the invitation and, of course, agreed. This was exactly what she needed. Assistant Shen said there was no need to thank him. It should be the other way around. She was their guest, and they should be grateful for her presence. But before they entered, they needed to change something about her appearance. The place Assistant Shen led her to was absolutely incredible. Everything was so bright and elegant. The girl was amazed. The dresses on the mannequins stood out incredibly, far beyond anything she'd seen in stores before. The girl was sincerely impressed that there was such a luxurious dressing room here, even a huge selection of handbags. In less than a minute, a few other girls approached Soo Jin-hwan and told her she could just relax now. They'd take care of the rest. Assistant Shen, watching the scene, quietly acknowledged to himself that he was very pleased with how everything turned out. What delighted him most was that Miss Soo hadn't even realized what was going on yet. A little later, the man left the dressing room to find Mr. Hwolikin and inform him that everything was ready. Today, that man also looked incredibly elegant. It seemed like the light colors only highlighted his aristocratic features even more. Meanwhile, the few girls finished their work and told Miss Soo she was ready. When they turned her toward the mirror, Soo Jin-hwan barely recognized herself. Her look was stunning. One of the girls came closer and ran her hand through the main heroine's hair, confessing that she had styled many models and celebrities before, but Madame Soo was in a league of her own. All the girls agreed that even without makeup, the girl was a beauty, and the makeup only enhanced her natural good looks. After that, the girls suggested she pick out a dress. It turned out there was an entire new collection of expensive clothes. The girl's eyes were truly dazzled. She genuinely liked the clothes, even though, unlike her sister, she didn't usually buy such things. After looking through all the dresses, she stopped at one. She decided not to try anything else on and wear that one immediately. One of the girls told her that Madame Soo had great taste in clothes and pointed out where she should go to get dressed. The main heroine had already put on the dress when she suddenly realized she couldn't reach the zipper at the back. She heard someone come in. Thinking it must be one of the girls, she asked for help with the zipper. The person walked up and did as Soo Jin-hwan asked. But instead of a pleasant female voice, a man's voice responded. And not just any man's, but one she knew very well. Soo Jin-hwan immediately recognized Hwolikin, but she definitely hadn't expected to see him here, especially dressed so elegantly. The dress was long, so when the girl turned in surprise at seeing Hwolikin, she stepped back, accidentally stepping on him and tripping. Like in a real drama, she fell backward, only managing to let out a cry and shut her eyes. And just like in a drama, her dear prince caught his heroine by the waist. Catching her, he wrapped one arm around her and pulled her closer, holding her tight. For a few seconds, they stood like that, silently, staring into each other's eyes. Regaining her senses, though not saying thank you, she began to push herself away, telling him to take his hands off her waist and let her go. But of course, Hwolikin had no intention of letting her go today. He gave her a mysterious little smile, saying nothing. He admired the heroine's beauty, especially now that she'd been so beautifully styled. As always, he reached out and ran his finger across her lips. Taking advantage of her stunned silence, he leaned in and kissed her. It was the kind of kiss that was so him. Forceful, passionate, even a little rough. The heroine did not appreciate this gesture. With her free hand, she began to pound on Huolikin's chest, bluntly hinting for him to let her go. But as usual, it was Huolikin who was in control. He quickly grabbed her wrist and held it, preventing her from resisting. Nothing was going to ruin this kiss, he thought. So he leaned in more, kissing her harder, more passionately. He held both of her hands, taking away any chance for her to push him away. Su Jinhwan was already running out of breath. But finally, he thought of that himself. He pulled away, letting her breathe and catch her breath after their wild lip game. Fortunately, he didn't kiss her again and allowed her to step back completely. Su Jinhwan wiped her lips and was about to say something sharp, but stopped. She stopped because the man suddenly lifted her up in his arms, cutting off her complaints mid-sentence. Huolikin smiled in satisfaction as the girl, though not struggling at all, complained and demanded to be set down. In that moment, the man even looked charming. He smiled sweetly but didn't look her in the eye, simply carried her a few steps and said, "This way." As he was setting her down on a seat, Su Jinhwan frowned and asked what he was planning to do. She looked at him with surprise and a bit of indignation, completely red in the face from the kiss, like a little tomato. She was even more surprised when Huolikin stood in front of her with a pair of heels in his hands. Pink, a perfect match for her dress, as if they'd been waiting for a princess to wear them. Completely thrown off, the heroine lowered her gaze to the shoes and hesitantly asked if he was really holding those for her. A silly question. There were only the two of them in the room, and the man was already wearing shoes. Without replying, he knelt down on one knee in front of Su Jinhwan. In response to her question about what he was doing, he carefully untied the laces on her sneakers and pulled them off to put on the beautiful heels. After taking off her shoes, he held her feet in his hands for several minutes, gaze lowered. It was clear he was studying them, probably thinking something inappropriate, Su Jinhwan thought to herself. She said, not scolding, just still in shock, that she could have easily changed her shoes herself. But really, was she expecting a reply? Today, Huolikin seemed to have decided to play the silent game. Like he had water in his mouth. Holding her foot gently with both hands, he ran his fingers along it, thinking how small it was. Like Cinderella's, but that night it had fit him perfectly. The heroine couldn't take it anymore and blushed deeply, shouting at him to stop tickling and staring at her foot. Huolikin listened silently, smiled, exhaled, lowered his head, and focused on the task, carefully putting the heel on her foot. When the job was done and Su Jinhwan stood up, she admitted that expensive shoes were truly a luxury. No pressure, no rubbing, a perfect fit. Finally, even Huolikin spoke. Not in short phrases, but in full sentences. He said it was his brother's birthday and he didn't have a partner. Su Jinhwan didn't believe him. She even said aloud that the idea of a man like him not having a date tonight was absurd. Any girl would be thrilled to be here with him. When she mentioned that every girl would be clinging to him, Huolikin's mood suddenly turned serious again. Then he gave her that look and directed it straight at the heroine. Su Jinhwan grew embarrassed and asked if everything was all right, seeing how he suddenly turned his gaze to her and stared blankly as if spellbound. Huolikin leaned forward, gently took the heroine's hand, and smiled sweetly, inviting Su Jinhwan to be his companion at the party. The girl became flustered again and looked innocently into the man's eyes. A blush bloomed on her cheeks, and she stammered as she tried to respond. But she stopped herself before a yes slipped from her lips. She clenched her hand into a fist to bring herself back to her senses. Firmly closing her eyes, she decided she would never give in to a man like him. She needed to gather her thoughts. Su Jinhwan blurted out that the night they spent in each other's arms had been nothing but a misunderstanding. Nothing more. And he had no right to seduce her or behave like this. She didn't even give him a chance to respond. She turned around and headed for the exit, saying she had a ton of things to do and wouldn't play childish games with him. When the assistant stood outside the door guarding to ensure no one disturbed Mr. Huolikin, he thought everything would be fine, until Su Jinhwan stormed out of the office. The man couldn't believe that his boss had failed to win the girl over, even with the tenderness he never showed to anyone. Moreover, seeing his young master endure humiliation, that was something new. The effort was worth it just to witness that. The cruise that night looked absolutely unreal. Everything looked incredibly expensive. Every corner was glowing, cutting through the darkness. When Su Jinhwan ran away from Huolikin, she couldn't find her sister anywhere. She had already walked through most of the liner, but the girl with red hair was nowhere to be seen. However, wherever the main heroine went, everyone noticed her, both women and men. Some were jealous, others admired her. Among the crowd that turned to look at Su Jinhwan was Su Qingwan. The girl suddenly spotted her hated sister, who was captivating everyone around. Just how did this Su Jinhwan, the girl fumed internally, manage to get into an exclusive party and on top of that, find the time to dress so glamorously? The girl came out of her hiding spot herself, suddenly lunging forward and grabbing the heroine by the hand. Su Qingwan hysterically asked how her sister even got here. The girl smiled smugly and said that if Su Qingwan was here, then why shouldn't she be? Or was her sister that scared? When they stepped out, Su Jinhwan grabbed the girl by the shoulder and shouted that she was giving her one last chance to confess what she had done, and then to fix it. Sister Qingwan shouted back that her sister's brother was none of her damn business, so she wasn't going to worry about it. Besides, she said, no one has the right to influence the donor's decision. The girl frowned even more and said that, yes, that's true. But this time, everything happened precisely because of Su Qingwan. The girl didn't respond with anything coherent, she just screamed for her sister to let go of her. Loudly enough for someone to hear. And she succeeded. Since Su Jinhwan had her back turned, she didn't see someone approaching them. So Su Qingwan immediately played the victim. In just a few seconds, tears appeared in her eyes and the girl begged not to be hit, saying she was ready to confess everything. Su Jinhwan, of course, was shocked. She couldn't even imagine what disgusting trick her sister had come up with again, or in front of whom she was putting on this show. And suddenly, a man appeared beside the heroine, grabbed her by the shoulder, and forcefully pulled her away from Su Jinhwan, loudly asking what she wanted from the innocent girl. Looking at the man who had so roughly pulled her, the girl recognized him as the guy Su Qingwan went to a private room with that night. Su Qingwan immediately fell into Huo Shaoxuan's arms. He didn't even have time to react, just tried to comfort her verbally, saying he was here now and everything was fine. Hearing how Sister Qingwan addressed the man, the heroine realized that this must be the adopted son of the Huo family, the one they loved more than Li Qin. Overall, the man didn't seem like a bad person, but he got angry not knowing the situation and turning to Su Jinhwan, asked who she even was, but it wasn't the girl who answered. It was a rough male voice declaring that this girl was his dance partner. The girl was very surprised to hear both the voice and the words the man said. She turned and looked at him in astonishment. Su Qingwan, in Shaoxuan's embrace, lit up when she saw the real heir of the Hu family. Meanwhile, the man beside her looked confused. What's more, there was a clear change in the woman's emotions. She had just been crying, and now she was delighted to see his stepbrother. And Su Jinhwan noticed it too, how her sister was practically crawling out of her skin to get Li Qin's attention. So, Huo Shaochen was just a stepping stone toward her real goal. While Su Jinhwan was distracted, the hand of her sister's real goal slid onto her waist, pulling her closer. Huo Liqin smiled proudly and asked if there was a problem, since they were bothering his dance partner. Shaochen hesitated, saying he understood this was his stepbrother's dance partner, but didn't know how to continue. What even happened between the girls? And he was also puzzled by the fact that Li Qin, who usually avoided women, had actually shown up today with such a beautiful lady. That same lady, Su Jinhwan, was once again outraged at how arrogant this man was. Seriously, he just puts his hands wherever he wants. She raised her hand in protest, but of course the man intercepted her. Then, with a playful smile and a glance at Su Jinhwan, he remembered that he hadn't introduced her to his brother yet. But the man never got the chance. Su Qingwan interrupted. She said she'd introduce them herself. After all, they were just sisters who had a little spat. Shaochen apologized for jumping to conclusions and said that the music seemed to be starting already, then invited Su Qingwan to dance. That smug chicken, casting her dumb but sly gaze at her sister, suggested they all dance together. She looked so predatory because she knew Su Jinhwan had never taken dance classes, so she didn't know how to dance. Of course, the heroine understood that if she went, she could end up embarrassed since she wouldn't be able to manage it. She hesitated, unsure of what to say. Su Jinhwan was angry. Her sister had been taught etiquette and manners. Madame Su spared no expense for that. But for her, they had. So she lowered her head and said she didn't want to. But Li Qin cheerfully leaned in and said that she was his partner after all. Who else would dance with him then? The girl looked at the man with innocent eyes and asked if he wasn't afraid of being embarrassed in front of everyone, since she couldn't dance. Huo Liqin smiled and pulled her close again, saying he had never been embarrassed in his life. Leading the girl where needed, he added that it wouldn't matter if it happened once, but let anyone dare to laugh. A grimace of hatred and disgust twisted Soo Kyungwon's face. She secretly envied her sister and thought she didn't deserve it. Entering the hall, the girl whispered that she wasn't sure if this idea was a good one, and they could still leave. Hua Lichan took his dance partner by the hand and said that if he said she would manage, then she would. Moreover, the Soo Jin-hwan he knew and saw had never been afraid of difficulties. She always moved forward, defying everyone, even herself. The girl replied that right now she'd rather hide like a turtle, mentally adding that she hadn't come here to be the center of attention. And that's exactly how the man addressed her. My little turtle. Then, taking her hand in his, he told her to place her other hand on his shoulder. The girl was genuinely surprised to hear him call her that and asked what the hell that nickname was supposed to mean. The man didn't listen to the heroine's complaints. He just pulled her body closer to his. Soo Jin-hwan did remember that no one danced this closely, so she said the man was doing it on purpose. Hua Lichan smiled and thought that little turtle suited this girl. He just wanted to squeeze her right then and there. The man leaned toward the girl and said a few more encouraging words along with compliments. And somehow she really did feel the rhythm. It seemed like the dance would be harder, but when you're not watching others and just dancing yourself, everything works out. The girl admitted that maybe things weren't as bad as she had thought before. She was actually managing something. Noticing that the girl was doing well, Hua Lichan smiled at her again and said it wasn't as scary as she thought. The heroine blushed but admitted the man was right. It wasn't so bad, and she even liked dancing. Besides, earlier she had feared people would laugh at her awkwardness, but no way. Everyone was admiring them. Soo Kyungwon entered the hall with Xiao Chuan, and it seemed like she was burning with jealousy. Soo Jin-hwan was dancing, and everyone was shouting that they were a perfect couple. But no negativity affected the wonderful dance of the two. Their hands intertwined so naturally, it seemed they were made for each other. They spun in the dance like graceful swans, enchanting everyone with the harmony of their movements. Yet behind the smooth gestures, a bit of tension lingered. He drew closer, she hesitated. When their dance ended, the girl raised her beautiful eyes to Lichan, wanting to say something. And the man looked into her eyes too, saying her name. At that moment, there seemed to be a magical spark between them. But the spark vanished. One of the Hu family's subordinates approached Mr. Lichan, breaking the moment. It turned out Mr. Huo's elder was waiting for him. Lichan kissed the girl on the forehead, said he'd be back soon, and told her to take a walk in the meantime. In fact, the heroine was glad to be alone. This Mr. Huo was like a light bulb. Everyone was staring at him. As she strolled around, she saw a dessert table and remembered she hadn't eaten in a while. One of the cakes was looking right at her. How could she resist not taking it? She loved sweets. In the end, she piled a whole mountain of treats for herself. Cakes, a donut. Now her soul felt happy. She had only managed to eat a few bites when someone called out to her, interrupting her meal. It was an unfamiliar girl who raised her brows and asked why she'd never seen her here before. It was Lin Zia, heiress of the wealthy Lin family. She crossed her arms and was clearly displeased. Soo Jin-hwan, taking a bite of cake, asked why a stranger cared who she was. Lin Zia said that if the girl was parading around with her future husband, then it was definitely her business who she was and why no one had seen her here before. The girl replied that if she was talking about Hua Lichan, then she should keep a closer eye on him. After all, he kept announcing to everyone that he was single. Before an argument broke out, Assistant Shen appeared between the girls, distracting Lin Zia. He suggested discussing Mr. Huo's interests somewhere quieter. The girl blushed and said she wanted to know everything about Hua Lichan. Soo Jin-hwan once again felt angry at Hua Lichan. How could these rich people behave this way? Ignoring the feelings of those they planned to marry? Assistant Shen had already walked away when a waiter approached with drinks. Lin Zia took a glass from the tray. And in the next moment, this clumsy hen spilled her glass right onto the heroine, even gasping as if it was an accident. Luckily, it wasn't boiling hot like that time with her sister, and the drink only got on the lower part of her dress. Even Assistant Shen shouted that Miss Lin was going too far. Her excuse was simple, with no tension. She claimed her hand just shook. Soo Jin-hwan barely smiled and didn't show that she was affected. She said she had long noticed that the hem of the dress just got in the way. After those words, she grabbed the wet part of her dress and suddenly yanked it. She pulled hard, tearing the dress right on herself. No one expected that. It seemed everyone who witnessed the situation and understood what had happened was shocked by her bold move. But it wasn't a bad decision at all. She did everything perfectly. Added a twist to the dress, turning something fancy into something unique. Now she looked even more beautiful. Turning away from Assistant Shen and Lin Zia, she grabbed more sweets and said the stranger could do whatever she wanted, just don't interrupt her while she's eating. After the humiliation, sparks of anger were flying off her. When the same waiter came by again with drinks, Assistant Shen bumped the tray, and all the glasses went flying onto Miss Lin. The girl was stunned. She had the right to spill drinks on the heroine, but for it to happen to her? Horrifying. Assistant Shen apologized, explaining that his hand shook, and the waiter suddenly appeared behind him. But of course, Lin Zia didn't believe such nonsense, and he even repeated her words, clearly to get revenge. So she slapped him hard across the face. Lin Zia yelled at the assistant so loudly that everyone turned to look, including the heroine. Miss Lin was so angry that she turned red, and both her evening and her dress were completely ruined. Su Jinhua came up to the man and asked if he was okay. It was quite a slap, and the girl clearly didn't hold back. Assistant Shen replied that he was fine, and said that a girl like her wouldn't leave quietly, not without slapping someone and drawing attention. And now, he added mentally, they better give him a bonus for workplace injury. After all, he was defending Miss Su. The girl asked again if he really didn't need help, but the man waved her off, saying he would apply ice to the injury later. However, the girl couldn't understand how someone could stay so calm after being slapped. While Su Jinhuan was talking to Assistant Shen, she didn't notice that a few men had gathered around. One of them invited her to dance, promising to teach her if she hesitated. But it seemed the men were not just inviting her. A silent struggle for status and wealth was unfolding among them. Huolikin was just returning to his partner when he saw the girl surrounded by strangers. Su Jinhuan tried to politely refuse, was about to say something, but didn't have time. Liken approached, grabbed her by the hand, and pulled her towards himself. She was surprised. His rough movement and interruption shocked her. She could have refused on her own. Seeing that the girl was already with a partner, the other men apologized and dispersed. Angry, Su Liken looked at Huolikin and sharply shouted for him to let her go. The man, displeased with the situation, replied that he had only stepped away for a minute, and already so many men were hanging around her. The main heroine shouted, asking if he was blaming her too. She reminded him that he was the heir to the Huo company and should be smart. And if he had a fiancé, he shouldn't touch other women. She didn't want to be part of his game. Huolikin was confused. Who mentioned a fiancé? He didn't understand, but his facial expression only angered the girl more. She felt disgusted. Sleep with such a man? And even feel something for him? That was surreal. He reached for her again. Instead, he got a strong shove and words that she would never be a mistress. Huolikin didn't want to let her go so easily, so he grabbed her wrist again and asked her to wait. But Su Jinhuan flared up with hysterical anger. She slapped him and screamed for him not to dare hold her. The slap really made him release his hand. What he felt remained a mystery. Su Jinhuan regretted it, not out of pity for him, but because of possible consequences. After all, Huolikin was no ordinary man. She quickly walked away before anyone could stop her, still breathing heavily. Later, she decided to quietly disappear to avoid further trouble. Everyone was stunned, so no one immediately followed her. Huolikin shouted irritably for them to stop staring. He allowed himself to be slapped, but didn't allow them to look at him that way. Clenching his fists, he followed Su Jinhuan. Su Qingwan, who had seen everything, followed him, shouting that she knew why her sister was behaving like that. The man stopped. He became curious. Half-turned, he asked what she meant. Su Qingwan explained that her sister hated mistresses because her mother had cheated on their father with a married man. Su Jinhuan was ashamed of this. At the end, she added that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But Huolikin interrupted, saying he knew a different story. He smiled. The difference between the girls was 6 months. Su Qingwan explained that Jinhuan's mother cheated while already pregnant, and her mother just comforted their father. Crossing his arms over his chest, Huolikin said it was strange to comfort a married man. Su Qingwan forced herself to cry and declared it was cruel, saying all of this was a lie by Su Jinhuan. The man just waved it off, saying that Jinhuan might hate, but she didn't gossip behind backs. Su Qingwan muttered something else, but no one was listening anymore. Xiaoshen, noticing Qingwan's disappearance, went to look for her and asked if everything was okay. Pretending tenderness, she cuddled up to him and invited him to dance. Walking beside such a wonderful man, she thought how she wished she could walk like that next to Huolikin. Another woman was watching all this. She found it hard to believe that Mr. Huo had chosen such a vile girl. Their lady would be displeased. Due to the delay in the conversation, Huolikin lost sight of Su Jinhua. But before moving on, he turned around just in time and did see her. There, he found his missing person, the beautiful Su Jinhwan, so sad and thoughtful, like a wounded swan. She noticed no one. She looked somewhere toward the horizon, enjoying solitude. Hualikin thought it must be cold in a dress in the chilly sea air, so he threw his jacket over her. Before she could accuse him again, he beat her to it. There was no fiancé. It was just gossip. The girl said there was no point in excuses. Once they parted, they would become strangers again. But Hualikin couldn't accept that. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He hugged her and whispered that he tried to find her and explain everything. And that meant something. If that's not enough, he said, then the man really doesn't know what to do. The girl pulled away and said not to tempt her, and besides, she still had things to do. Then Hualikin leaned forward and, placing his hand on her hair, kissed Su Jinhwan. It was so sudden and assertive that even the girl's jacket slipped off her shoulders and fell. But they didn't get distracted by that. Kissing so tenderly, so truly. The girl blushed all over. Her hair fell over her eyes, and she felt like she was running out of air. So she put her hands on Hualikin's shoulders, gently pushing him away. But no, it didn't work. It seemed Likin simply couldn't pull away, as if he had become addicted to it. Then the girl pressed her hands on his shoulders again. The kiss was incredible, but air was still needed. As soon as they pulled away from that pleasure, Su Jinhwan took a deep breath. She wanted to say something, but stopped when she saw how cutely Hualikin had blushed and was smiling. He, recovering himself, leaned toward the girl's ear and asked if that was enough. Su Jinhwan told him to stop saying such nonsense, and instead to let her go already, because he was hurting her, holding her too tightly. Smiling, he whispered in her ear that he just wanted to play a little bit more. And after that, he came up with biting the girl's neck, so sudden. Su Jinhwan pulled away, gasping. "Who does that?" She immediately thought, "He's a person, not a dog." Then she said the same to him, touching the spot where he had bitten. She also noticed it was exactly a part of the neck that was quite visible. So, unexpectedly for Hualikin, she grabbed his head with her hands and pulled him toward her. It was her revenge, to bite him right on the chin, where the bite would be even more noticeable. Hualikin himself didn't know what surprised him more. Such initiative from the girl or the very fact of the bite on his chin. Pretending to be angry, he asked if they could now consider themselves even. The girl stuck out her tongue and said exactly that. After that, the girl went inside, telling the man to calm down a little, but not to forget to hurry and invite her to dance. Touching the bite mark, Hualikin smiled childishly. It hurt, but it was nice that the girl had softened her attitude toward him. He was proud that he behaved more restrainedly and explained everything. Maybe something would work out between them? He didn't immediately go inside. He approached the railing and leaned on it. He said that this girl could be proud of the fact that she had taken over all his thoughts. And he thought that if she would fan the flame of their spark rather than extinguish it, then something very deep should come of it between them. Coming inside, the main heroine decided she needed to eat something else. For example, pastries. She had only just chosen which filling she wanted when someone pulled her toward them. Fortunately, it was Hualikin, who, looking at the pastry in her hand, asked if they were really that tasty. Then he raised the girl's hand to his face and gently bit off a piece of the pastry. The girl pulled her hand away and said he could have taken one himself. But Hualikin was sure the tastiest pastry was the one she held in her hand. Where they stood, there was a surveillance camera. And it wasn't just there. Someone was watching the couple. It was a respectable lady who kept looking at her TV until her assistant informed her that someone had been brought to her. It turned out that Su Qingwan was brought to her, who, leaning on Jenny, said she had accidentally twisted her ankle while dancing. The girl, just turning her head, saw that Madame Huo herself was sitting in front of her. Then she pulled away from Jenny. Surprisingly, the ankle immediately felt better, so the girl politely greeted her. Madame Hu, sipping tea from a mug, just gave the girl a cold look and told her to sit down. So Su Qingwan did, thinking about the powerful aura surrounding Madame Huo. The woman studied Su Qingwan for a few minutes and, after sipping her tea, asked if that was Su Qingwan's older sister. Then she pointed to a large plasma TV screen showing an image of her son and Su Jinhwan. The girl immediately said yes, that was her older half-sister. Then, Madame Huo asked if it was true that the girl's mother had once been expelled for being a traitor. Su Qingwan carefully said she was just a child then and didn't remember how it was, but seemed to have heard that from the servants. Madame Huo said the girl looked decent, seemed to have a pleasant character, and was a good person. But Madame Huo believed that a girl with such relatives had no business being involved with her son. Then Su Qingwan jumped up, saying she was ready to serve. Madame Huo said she had invited her here precisely for that reason, and if Su Qingwan helped, she would be generously rewarded. But the lady also added that her Xiaoshuan was a closed-off boy with a gentle character, so it would be better for Su Qingwan to keep her distance from him. The girl had already stood up, said they were just friends and she had no other intentions, and then Jenny came up to her. The assistant explained that Madame Hua wanted to rest, and that was why Su Qingwan was shown the door. The girl was outraged by the behavior of an ordinary girl, Jenny. She muttered angrily that some manager had no right to behave that way. But when she married a gentleman from their family, that servant would be packing her bags to leave. Suddenly, from behind the girl came a voice saying she was in the way and had to step aside. Turning her head in surprise at the feminine voice, she met the condescending gaze of Lin Zia. Su Qingwan said that the girl looked simply incredible. Her dress harmonized perfectly with Huo Liqin's suit. Of course, these were flattery. Su Qingwan had to pretend to be an innocent girl in front of everyone. Suddenly, Lin Zia also smiled, although she had just been angry. She said she was very pleased to hear such words. Then she looked angrily at the girl again and said that right now, next to her fiancé, was Su Qingwan's sister, not anyone else. The girl replied that they were related only on their father's side, and Su Qingwan hated her sister just as much, so they should become friends with Lin Zia. The girl smiled maliciously and hysterically asked if Su Qingwan really thought she would become her friend. Then Lin Zia did something crazy. She pushed the girl opposite her and she flew down the stairs. Su Qingwan screamed in fear. Unfortunately for herself, she couldn't keep her balance because she hadn't anticipated such a situation and wasn't holding on to the railing. Madame Lin smiled, turned around, and said after her that Su Qingwan could only dream of her friend's place. Su Qingwan tumbled down the stairs all the way to the bottom and was lying at the feet of the sister with Liqin. The main heroine put her hand on her hip and asked if her dear sister had decided to put on a concert here again. Su Qingwan started crying, saying she had lost her balance on the stairs. But she thought about the carpet. It was soft, so she only had a few bruises. And in front of Liqin, she could act out a scene. Su Jinhuan suddenly noticed they weren't alone here, and looking up, saw someone. Then she asked her sister if she really fell by herself or if maybe someone from above kindly helped her with that. Su Jinhuan thought about how she had already told her sister not to get involved with these wealthy heirs. Su Qingwan replied that no one had pushed her. It was her own carelessness that made her fall down the stairs. Su Jinhuan, of course, didn't believe her. Instead, she said to the girl sarcastically that she was simply great. There were no words. This stubbornness showed that Su Qingwan had patience. But Su Jinhuan simply couldn't leave her sister alone, so she decided to help her get up. Su Qingwan got up, saying that she was in a lot of pain now, but her gaze was fixed directly on Huo Liqin. She decided to take advantage of the situation and pretended to walk, but in pain, she stumbled over her own leg. Then she fell straight onto Huo Liqin, closing her eyes and expecting him to catch her. But no. Huo Liqin wasn't as foolish as she might have thought, so he reacted quickly and stepped back, not wanting to touch her. Su Jinhuan lowered her surprised gaze at her sister, mentally asking if she even had a bit of shame. Of course, the girl was a little worried about her sister. This time she probably really got hurt. But Huo Liqin just raised his hands and said he hadn't touched her. Then Huo Xiaoshuan joined them, having seen that Su Qingwan was lying on the ground, crying bitterly. The man ran up to the girl worriedly and helped her stand up while she was still complaining about how much it hurt. Huo Liqin immediately told his brother that he hadn't seen the full picture, and this Su Qingwan wasn't as innocent as she seemed, so she wasn't suitable for Xiaoshuan. The man opposite just raised his eyebrows and hissed that he knew himself who was suitable for him and who was not. After that, Xiaoshuan and Su Qingwan left the main heroine and Huo Liqin. Su Jinhuan, watching this scene, admitted that her sister was quite the actress. In front of the men, she was such an innocent lamb. Turning back to the angry Huo Liqin, the girl said that his brother really had a unique type. This spoiled the man's mood a lot. He was worried about his brother. He was worried because his brother was currently suffering from depression, a serious illness. And here was this insincere Su Qingwan. The main heroine was very surprised to learn that Huo Liqin's older brother had depression. They came from a wealthy family, had everything they needed, and some even said Madame Huo loved Xiaoshuan more than her own son. But when asked how that happened, the man didn't answer. Instead, he took the girl by the hand to go somewhere. It turned out that next to the liner, there was a small boat moored. The girl had already been invited on a date by Huo Liqin, but how could she go without settling the issue with the donor? She didn't explain the reason to the man, so Huo Liqin said there was no discussion. They were going. And to make sure the girl wouldn't get lost somewhere, Huolikin first pulled her to him by the waist. Then, very simply and easily, despite Su Jinhwan's dissatisfied screams, he threw the girl over his shoulder and walked forward. Su Jinhwan resisted, but Huolichin lightly smacked her and said not to move or he would throw her into the water to the sharks. That didn't work because words were a joke, but the fact that the man smacked he was reality, which she resisted even more. But Huolichin was too strong for her to really overcome him. He held the girl in his arms a little longer so the liner could sail a bit farther. Huolichin calmly settled on the sofa, folded his arms across his chest, and for several minutes listened to the girl calling him a narcissistic rooster who allowed himself too much. Then, when she sighed and fell silent, the man pulled her towards him. Su Jinhwan only had time to scream and be surprised before she suddenly fell right onto Huolichin's knees. Before she could start arguing and throwing a tantrum again, the man moved forward and kissed her on the lips. And honestly, it would be a sin not to admit how romantic it all was. A kiss on a separate little boat, under the moonlight. At the moment their lips parted briefly, the girl asked Huolichin to finally stop. But the man, already red in the face, said he just didn't have the strength to hold back anymore. So, consumed by desire and longing for this girl, he couldn't resist giving her another kiss. Su Jinhwan responded to the kiss. But their night was an accident. Just a moment passed, they were not a couple, not lovers. So what did he think of her? Besides, she had a sick brother waiting for her in the hospital. God, she had left the liner without learning anything. To get rid of Huolichin's persistent kisses, the girl bit his lip hard and, pushing him away, stepped back. And after that, completely free, she ran away from the man. To Huolichin, who also got up and was following her, she told him to turn the ship around and let her go as soon as possible. Su Jinhwan herself ran to the edge of the ship. Well, so that he wouldn't touch her there. Smiling, Huolichin rubbed his wounded lip with his hand and said there were only two of them here. Did the girl really think that if he wanted to take her by force, she would have escaped or called for help? Lichin considered that naive. Mentally, he added that he liked this naivete. Then the girl ran to the edge of the railing, turned her back to him, and said to stay put, otherwise she really would jump. Su Jinhwan thought that if she didn't want to be close to him or just be here, then no one could force her. Huolichin laughed and, covering his eyes, said that if she really wanted to, let her jump, but there were plenty of sharks in the water. The girl interrupted him, telling him not to even try to scare her. Looking at the perfectly calm sea, she decided there couldn't be any sharks there. But Lichin came even closer. The man approaching said she had to be smart and take care of her life, and he would give her everything she could wish for. Somehow he knew that Su Jinhwan needed money, so he said he would support her financially. Su Jinhwan angrily asked if he had been following her, but quickly and harshly added that probably everyone already knew she needed money. Huolichin pulled his hands out of his pockets and seriously said that as soon as the girl reached out to him and took a step toward him, her problems would become his problems, because there was no need to carry everything alone. Su Jinhwan looked straight at him, thinking his words were really eloquent. Surely any girl would fall for that. But she was no one. She would never trust such a wealthy, arrogant, and narcissistic man like Mr. Huo. Smiling, the girl said the man probably thought no one had the right to say no to him because he had always been a king. Huolichin lowered his head and asked why it wasn't enough that he wanted to be with her, to go through hardships together. He had never had such deep feelings before, and for her specifically. But the girl didn't listen. Closing her eyes, she said he should be thankful to her for the experience when someone dared to say no, and jumped into the water. Yes, the scene was unique. Everything started like in a movie, as if they were on the Titanic, but ended in just the first few minutes. But Huolichin was really worried. He wasn't lying about sharks in the water. It was true. He just couldn't leave her there, in cold water full of predators. So he hurriedly took off his tie and jacket. But the girl wouldn't have jumped into the water if she didn't know how to swim. She was proud, not stupid. Holding her breath before falling, she was now swimming back up. The cruise liner was just within reach, so Su Jinhwan moved actively to avoid freezing. But not everything went as planned. Despite the girl's confidence, circumstances were often not in her favor. The girl felt she couldn't move. Something was pulling her leg down. It turned out that her leg was tangled in long seaweed. The plants pulled her down, and she ended up underwater, with no chance of getting out by herself. Besides, she physically couldn't hold her breath any longer. At one point, she regretted being so proud. What now? Would she never save her brother? But a ray of hope appeared along with the man she was running from. No, Huolichin wasn't perverted enough to kiss a girl underwater. In fact, he breathed some air into her. Their kiss quickly broke. because even though they got some oxygen, she still needed to free her leg. That's what Huolikin started doing. He swam to her leg and began to untangle the seaweed. Fortunately, he managed to do it before the air ran out completely, and they swam up. Su Jin Hwan, after surfacing, first took a deep breath. God, she had almost died. She needed a few more seconds to recover and realize she was alive. She had been saved. But why was only she saved? After all, her rescuer was Huolikin, who was nowhere to be seen. At first, the girl looked around in all directions. Maybe he surfaced somewhere else? But no, he was nowhere to be found. In despair, the girl cried out loudly, calling the man's name and asking where he was and why he hadn't surfaced with her. And the water? It continued to hide from the girl her savior. Realizing that something bad had probably happened to him, the girl started crying even more bitterly, at first without thinking about what to do. She forced herself to hate the man. But what kind of damn hatred, girl? He saved you again. And this time something terrible could have happened to him. The person risked himself to save you, ungrateful. She decided she also wouldn't let him slip away to the other world, and if necessary, she would save him by herself. Fortunately, she didn't manage to jump down, because the man's hand had already appeared on the surface. Tears streamed down her face along with the seawater, but she was glad to see the man was still there. Falling to her knees, she grabbed Leekin's hand, asking how he was feeling and where he had disappeared to in the first place. Falling to her knees, she grabbed Leekin's hand, asking how he was feeling and where he had disappeared to in the first place. Huolikin, smiling, said that there was indeed a place for him in her heart. She even worried. The girl blushed and looked away, saying she had been worried about herself. If the man hadn't come up, what would she do alone here? She still hadn't learned to steer the ship. But Huolikin wasn't even listening anymore. Probably just reached out for a kiss from the girl. Kisses with her felt like a lifebuoy. After such events, it gave hope for life. Fortunately, the kiss was short. The main heroine, blushing, wanted to say something but didn't have time. She was interrupted by her own sniffle. So much for swimming in cold water in the middle of the night. Besides that, looking down, Leekin noticed something else unpleasant. The girl had a wound on her leg. It turned out that some seaweed had injured the girl's delicate leg. That's why Huolikin decided to carry her in his arms. He said there was a bath, towels, and dry clothes in the cabin. The room was neither big nor small, but at least it was warmer there. Su Jin Hwan was already in a robe and covered with a blanket. She had gotten quite cold in the water, so the cold caught her immediately. Huolikin also changed his clothes. He found medicine in the cabin and took out a pill to reduce the girl's fever. He also brought her a glass of warm water so she wouldn't have to swallow the pill dry. While taking care of her, the man asked her to be a good girl. Drink warm water, don't argue, and so on. Su Jin Hwan didn't appreciate this and told him not to act as if she were his pet. Smiling, Huolikin asked where such strange thoughts came from in her head at all. Su Jin Hwan replied that this was typical male behavior, acting as if women were their toys or pets. Huolikin just smiled and hugged the girl, saying that she probably had a very good imagination. After that, they got into an argument. It turned out the man had said something to the girl in the club, but now didn't remember his words. But Huolikin simply couldn't recall what exactly those words were that the girl had remembered so well. Su Jin Hwan turned away from the man displeased, not wanting to continue the conversation. She was upset that he had just taken and forgotten. Huolikin tried for a few more minutes to force himself to remember, but failed. He turned back to the girl, asking what exactly those words were. The girl didn't answer, and Leekin was a bit confused. It was probably her style to tease or insult him, but not to be silent. But it turned out the girl had curled up like a caterpillar and quietly fallen asleep. It actually looked very cute, so the man smiled sweetly while looking at the main heroine. He decided to leave her there for now. Why wake such a beautiful girl? Especially since she was sick. Leekin decided to wash her dirty clothes for the time being. By the way, he did it by hand, just turned on warm water and started washing. Among the clothes was a dress. It wasn't that the clothes were very dirty, but they could have been fresher. Suddenly, a piece of fabric fell out of it. It turned out to be Su Jin Hwan's underwear. Looking at it, the man thought that they were very small. It's hard to say whether this impressed him or something else, but for some reason, he lingered his gaze on them. Then, realizing this was causing him to have strange thoughts, he blushed and looked at his reflection. Then he continued washing them, cursing himself for sometimes being such a pervert. The man hung the clothes up to dry calmly. He himself stood right above the main heroine, arms crossed over his chest. He was still surprised that the girl trusted him so much. No, really, she just relaxed and fell asleep, not thinking about the fact that there was still a man here whom she probably didn't like much and hardly knew. For a moment, he thought it might be worth giving her a lesson, to show her that you shouldn't trust anyone blindly like that. The man leaned over her hair, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, but that was all he could manage. His hand lay on Su Jinhwan's shoulder, and doubting every action, he tightly squeezed the sleeve of her robe. But he simply couldn't do anything, or as he had threatened, teach her a lesson. His conscience wouldn't allow him to treat the girl that way, especially since warm feelings were growing in his chest for her. So, blushing like a teenager, he looked at his hand and decided he had no choice. After some time, the main heroine woke up. She didn't even know what exactly woke her. Nothing bad had been dreamed, and it wasn't morning yet. The girl rubbed her eyes, slowly sat up in bed, and asked either to the man or just to herself what time it was. But Huolikin was nowhere in sight. She realized something was wrong when she heard strange noises behind her. Then her gaze landed on Huolikin, and it was he who was making those sounds she had heard earlier. It wasn't hard to collate the facts and figure out what he was doing. He probably felt her gaze because he turned around and asked if she was already awake. And it was such an awkward moment, like from a comedy movie. The girl looked at him in shock, but without judgment, shifting her eyes between his face and lower down. Only when she fully realized what had happened did she shout across the entire liner that the man should be ashamed. Meanwhile, Xiaoxuan had already escorted Su Qingwan home. It seemed this girl really captivated him. Now she was about to say something important. It was a pity, of course, that Xiaoxuan was only adopted into the Huo family. She even squeezed out a few tears, saying she had made a difficult decision. They needed to break up. Xiaoxuan turned pale. Then he said that he promised to take her as his wife and follow all traditions. But Su Qingwan said that they were people from two different worlds, destined not to be together. Worried, Xiaoxuan asked if his family had said anything bad to her. But Su Qingwan, smiling, said she just understood her place and that they needed to end everything right now. After these words, the girl pushed Xiaoxuan away, said that it was over, and said goodbye. At first, she looked upset, but in reality, she didn't care. By leaving Xiaoxuan, she got the chance to get closer to Huolishan. When Madame Su met her daughter and asked why she looked so happy, Su Qingwan first just collapsed onto the sofa. Then she recalled how her mother had once said she wanted to see her daughter in a wealthy family. And now this could become a reality. Pleased, Madame Su asked if the girl had something going on with the heir of the Huo family. Xiaoxuan. Su Qingwan replied that the guy was not a blood relative, though sweet, so he wasn't very suitable. The girl told her that Madame Huo seemed to despise her sister Jinhuan, so she would destroy her and maybe become part of their family. Madame Su was proud of her daughter, saying she had always seen potential, intelligence, and strength in her. Su Qingwan replied that you have to fight for happiness with your teeth, and she was ready to be better than she had been before. Now Su Qingwan had indeed become more dangerous to Su Jinhuan and her brother. By the way, Su Jinhuan woke up quite slowly in the morning, first barely opening her eyes, then yawning. She hadn't slept well because during the night she had caught Huo Lichendoing, not a very pleasant thing, and then couldn't fall asleep for another 2 hours. As soon as she remembered him, Huo Lichen spoke up, saying he was waiting for her to wake up. It turned out he came with a plate in his hands. He said she was probably hungry, so he cooked porridge. Sitting at the table, the girl asked in surprise if he really made it himself. He replied yes with his own hands. And when she looked suspiciously at the bowl, Mr. Huo almost swore the food wasn't poisoned. However, he admitted it was his first kitchen experience, so if she criticized it, he would throw her to the sharks. By the way, the dish looked and smelled pleasant, according to the heroine. Before she even started eating, she found it very funny, and she giggled sweetly. Huolikin thought she was making fun of him, but the girl explained that no one had ever cooked porridge for her when she was sick, so it made her laugh. Calming down a bit, she took a spoon and tasted the dish. And although unexpected, the rice turned out very, very tasty. The flavor pleasantly surprised her. She devoured it greedily, saying the shrimp were fresh and firm, which was very delicious. At first, Huolishan blushed. That was his reaction to compliments. Then he quietly said that the girl probably had a difficult childhood. Perhaps he decided something important because he decisively took the girl's face in his hands and turned it towards him. Then, blushing even more, he said his words were no joke and offered Su Jinhuan to become his girlfriend. Of course, the girl was stunned. Her? Huolikin's girl? Huolikin smiled satisfied and added that if she stayed silent too long, he would consider that consent. Then, unable to bear the pause, he leaned forward and kissed her on the lips. But the girl didn't respond even after a few minutes. Her gaze was either worried or surprised. Then Huolikin pulled away himself and anxiously asked if everything was all right. The girl was really confused. She said she was just a bit surprised and embarrassed. She hadn't expected that. It was hard not to notice that after these words, Huolikin tensed up and nervously swallowed, asking if her surprise meant no. The girl didn't refuse directly. She hesitated in her words and apologized if her actions or words gave him reason to think she wasn't indifferent to him. At that moment, the man's heart was pounding so loudly it seemed they both could hear it. But his hand slowly unclenched and released the girl's shoulder. He gradually stood up and, without saying a word, turned away. It was hard to tell exactly what emotion it was, but Su Jinhwan decided it was anger. The girl sighed heavily. She didn't say another word. She couldn't do that and give the man any hope. Stepping outside into the yard, she thought that the man must have lost his face after her words, so he would probably hate her. But at that very moment, her thoughts switched to something else. She noticed she couldn't find her underwear anywhere. There was the dress, but no underwear. Could the wind have blown it away? At least it seemed impossible to her since the night was quiet and windless. She leaned a little over the railing to get a better look at the view and at the same time check if maybe her underwear was accidentally somewhere there. There was nothing anywhere, but worried about her actions, Huolikin was right there. He grabbed her shoulder and pulled her back, asking if she was out of her mind. He understood that the girl had rejected his feelings, but jumping into the water from here and wishing to end her life just because of that was crazy. The girl calmed him down, saying that it was too early for her, a young lady, to say goodbye to life. She had plenty of ambitions, a great future. It just seemed that way from the outside, she said. The man asked her not to do anything foolish and not to lie if anything happened. He was Huo Lichen, heir to the Huo company, and he wasn't someone to be lied to, as he was trained to accept the truth, no matter what it was. Su Jinhwan said it wasn't about Huo Lichen, but that she just couldn't find her underwear. That was why she leaned over the railing in the first place. The man, thinking about how right she was yesterday, remembered which underwear she was talking about exactly. He thought that was her way of reproaching him. So he shouted that if Su Jinhwan thought he was some pervert who took her underwear and hid it, that was already too much. The girl blushed and said she didn't think that at all. She just asked. Besides, she remembered what this non-pervert had been up to last night. Huolichen said that if he wanted to take her underwear, he would have asked her for it, not stolen it. After that, Liken promised to call the service staff to find the girl's things. Putting on a new dress, the heroine sighed with relief. They had already arrived, and being on dry land felt very pleasant, especially after all those events. Going outside, Liken threw his jacket over the girl. It was cool, and she still had a high temperature at night. Still, the man cared about the girl. She, of course, thanked him. But it was time for them to part ways, and this time for good, to forget about each other's existence. Especially after everything that happened these 2 days, it was vital for them to make sure they would never see each other again. She didn't even say goodbye. She just left, leaving Huolichen with thoughts about how strong-willed she was. The whole time the heroine was walking away, the man hoped she would come back, stop, reconsider. Any hint would have been enough. He would have dropped everything and just embraced Su Jinhwan. But Su Jinhwan opened the car door, went inside, and didn't turn around, not even once. While he stood there, while he waited, she did nothing. His heart skipped a painful beat when the door slammed shut. It was the first time such feelings were born in his chest for someone, and now it hurt so much. Now he firmly decided that he had to gather his strength and end these feelings. He needed to move on with his life. But the girl turned around. Then, when she was in the car, in fact, she was also upset that it all had to be left like that. Tears ran down her cheeks. Su Jinhwan would have agreed without hesitation if only her brother were healthy. She had to focus on his life and health. When a loved one was on the edge of life and death, and she would be swallowed up by love and her own life, it seemed wrong. Therefore, no love, only her brother's life. Now the main thing was to find that donor who refused them and understand what exactly happened. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this story and what manhwa you'd like to see next. See you in the next installment.